Hello and welcome to the Print Debate. I'm Snehesh Alex Philip. Now, the French President Emmanuel Macron has already landed here in India and he would be the chief guest at the Republic Day parade tomorrow. Now, the India-French relations have seen a huge jump, not just in terms of bilateral, but also at a strategic level. And for this, I have with me two distinguished guests. Of course, on my left is our in-house columnist and a fellow at the MPIDSA, Miss Swasti Rao. She's someone who writes, who focuses a lot on European affairs and writes a column for us. So if you're watching it for the first time, do log on to our print website and read her columns, because she is someone who gets you a very younger and a more modern point of view when it comes to not just India's relations, but also what is happening globally. I have also with me Keshav Padmanabhan. He is my colleague here at the Foreign Affairs team. He is someone who covers the Ministry of External Affairs closely, and of course the think tanks and the embassy circuit. So both of you, thank you so much and welcome on the show. Keshav, my first question to you, now that Macron has landed. Well, he's landed, I would have assumed he would have landed in Delhi. Why has he landed in Jaipur?
So, if we look at our Prime Minister and what he does with these global visits, is that he ensures that these leaders have a sort of roadshow. It's part of his brand of foreign policy. For example, we can remember the large roadshow he had with the ruler of UAE just recently during the Vibrant Gujarat Summit.
Yes.
Or even Donald Trump's huge gathering at the stadium in Ahmedabad, at the Narendra Modi Stadium in Ahmedabad. So this is something that the Prime Minister, it's part of his brand of foreign policy. When he brings these foreign leaders to India, generally he tries to have them, especially if they're on a state visit, have these roadshows, interact with the Indian public, to sort of signify the strength in the relations between the two countries.
Plus, he has always focused on moving things out of Delhi, because the Delhi would anyway see, President Macron as the Republic Day guest. But that's his brand of politics as well as his brand of foreign policy, right?
Yes.
Swasti, now he's here. Yeah. I look at it from a defense and diplomacy point of view. While of course there are big deals that are in discussion between the both countries, they're unlikely to be signed tomorrow, because those discussions are ongoing. Of course, there would be a joint statement which will mention those intentions. But in your sense, why is this visit important?
The first thing that comes to my mind when you say why is this visit important is that what more can I add to this wonderful template of conducting bilateral ties in a very uncertain world, which is the India-France strategic partnership. Now, when you ask me why is this visit important, I think if I try to be more exact and try to be brief, I would say that a good vantage point would be the Horizon 2047 roadmap that the two sides had signed when our Prime Minister was the chief guest at the Bastille Day last July. And it's just in the last span of 6 months, the two leaders have met a number of times. And if you look carefully at the Horizon 2047, it talks about certain pillars and then also a comprehensive cooperation matrix that India and France are capable of. So what it means basically is that, of course, there are the three major pillars of defense industry cooperation. I'm sure we're going to be talking about that a lot. There is this, expanding cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. I think it is becoming more and more important as days are passing. And of course, all of that is rooted in strategic autonomy and push for multipolarity. The third is definitely the futuristic dimension to our bilateral ties, which is the collaboration in space, because we recently signed the bilateral space, the strategic space dialogue, with France. And then there is a whole host of, emerging areas, for example, triangular cooperation, green energy, on blue economies, on maritime domain awareness, on a whole host of things. So basically the beauty, and of course I should mention the slow progress that has been made on the civil nuclear cooperation in Jaipur. So that would be one of the things to to be talking about. And I think not many people would know that the Jaipur nuclear power, this program is, if it comes through and if it starts to operate, it would be the world's largest nuclear power plant with 9,900 megawatt or so, with that capacity. So I think we are talking about a relationship which is rooted in trust, which already has these pillars of bilateral ties, but which is also expanding. So that is the beauty of Indo-France ties. And when Macron coming here in 2024, it's the sixth French leader to have been accorded this honor. So that obviously gives France a very
As a
unique
Republic
position
Day chief guest,
as
so
a
he's the
Republic
sixth.
Day chief guest, a unique position. Second, I think which is important is that if you look carefully, India in the last few years have come up with this template called the 2+2 template, right?
Yeah.
And we have this with select few countries in the world. We operate with this template, whether it's the US, Japan, with Russia, Australia, and the most recent is the UK. But when it comes to France, there is a realization that we actually don't need any template because everything is so damn wonderful. The point is how to take it forward, and that is why I guess the Horizon 2047 document is important. But like you said, it is difficult to imagine that announcements or deals would be made or deals will be signed in this particular visit, because the Horizon 2047 document came only 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So we would be talking about progress, and the progress itself will be significant. But the point is, it's a very steady pace.
Yeah. And plus I completely agree with you on the fact that we should not look at these visits just in pure terms of deals and MOUs signed, because these visits are much, much more significant than just a deal for additional Scorpion submarines or 26 Rafale Marines. Uh, Keshav, now tell me, the French president has come, but he's also come with a large delegation. So who are these people who have come with him?
So he's come with three different ministers along with a business delegation, hoping to expand ties in different fields with India. But it should also be noted that this visit comes 25 years after the strategic partnership between India and France was signed on the 26th of January 1998, which was India's first with a Western country and France's first outside of Europe. So in that sense, the kind of leaders that he has brought sort of indicates that seriousness, that they're looking at, different avenues of ties, be it, I think, the culture ministers here as well, who's come down. So you can see that France and India, in the last year especially, I think there was this mobility agreement that was signed. France has promised a 5-year Schengen visa for Indian students who finish their masters. So in that sense, the kind of ministers that he's brought is sort of an indication towards how the French-Indian relationship goes through different phases and different sort of layers, whether it's people-to-people ties or space or nuclear or defense. So that's sort of, I think, the kind of individuals that Macron has brought with him to sort of indicate that during this visit here on 25th and 26th of January.
Well, that's an interesting point that you mentioned. And Swasti, I'd like to come to you on this. While of course there's a whole lot of strategic importance, there's space, there's AI, there's people-to-people cultural ties that is under focus. But again, one of the main focus areas is defense. And when I look at France, at one point of time, India and Russia were the closest allies. So I have this whole theory in my own mind, is that the France is the new Russia. You talk about fighter aircraft, you talk about submarines, you talk about jet engine technology also. The French are there. Of course, the French comes with a significant cost. It's just that they end up being expensive. But the French are there whenever India needs them. And, for the viewers also, even after the nuclear test, the nuclear test, the French were the ones who continued to support even though the entire West had banished us. So is France the new Russia?
Well, that's an interesting way you look at it, because of course Russia in many ways is symptomatic of a trustworthy partner, a friend that has stood up for India, who has also stood up for India's permanent seat at the Security Council, and who's also backed India when it comes to Kashmir. So Yes, in many ways, yes. France is the new Russia, and in fact, France is actually a lot more, because if you look carefully, Russia was never the technological power. It was the defense power, but it was never the technological power. And it was never really, and a big economic power either. So I think what really adds to the India-France bonhomie is, of course, the defense relations that we had with Russia. You've already mentioned submarines, you've mentioned the aircrafts, you mentioned the aircraft engines, very importantly, and you've mentioned, a whole host of things. But at the same time, when you look at what more can France offer, it definitely sort of, for example, what the entire gamut of Indo-Pacific is something that was not really there in the India-Russia relationship. So France is definitely the new Russia, but I would say a lot more. That's one. The other thing is that, Snehesh, just because you were mentioning so much about who's coming with Macron and all that, I think there is a realization, because I travel very frequently to France all the time, and I talk to a whole host of people, policymakers, and stuff. So two things really catch my attention. One is that even they would want to know more about India when it comes to people ties. So we have great G2G relations. We have, I would say, a medium level of B2B ties, which is the trade relations are doing well. I mean, right now our trade is an all-time high of about $13 billion dollars or something. But obviously there is more potential to explore. And the other thing is that they are also wanting. They somehow get interested in understanding how do the Indian side view the strategic autonomy concept, right? Because strategic autonomy is considered to be this vantage point which sort of steers the India-France relationship. And I think I would like to mention here is that even though that remains to be an ideal in France, right? I mean, even though it remains to be this really foundation of how France looks at itself in Europe and in the world. But having said that, after the Russia-Ukraine situation, there is also a growing sense of realism. Okay, and the way I look at it is that France's pursuit of strategic autonomy is also going to be rooted in a sense of realism, and I think we are seeing it in the case of how they are now fending for Ukraine. We will also see it what they would do in Indo-Pacific, and in terms of how France's relationship with the US develops, and all of that would have a bearing on France and India relations, even though they are rooted in strategic autonomy. But I think they would also be having the sense of realism.
That's a very important point that you mentioned, Swasti. And so you talk about strategic autonomy. France is part of the whole NATO thing. It is close to all its allies. But the fact is that AUKUS also happened. The Australia, where the French feel completely cheated. And even if I was a French, even I would have felt cheated. But in terms of how is their relationship with rest of the within EU itself, under Macron's government, with Germany, especially on this whole Russia-Ukraine thing, and also with the US, have they been able to bridge the gap or the cracks that had come about?
That's a very, very good question, Snehesh, because I think in India, a lot of times there is a tendency to not understand how the European security architecture is being put together after it was shredded to pieces with what happened in Ukraine. So I think the idea here is that, or the general opinion here is that, the Europeans are fighting among themselves, and if Trump were to come back, he would kind of withdraw from NATO. And I think there's a tendency to think into binaries, right? That it's going to be either this or that. I think the situation out there, the reality is far more complex. There is a very palpable sense in Europe that Ukraine is pretty much a project for the entire Europe. And if you notice carefully, especially after 2023, didn't really give the kind of advantage to the Ukrainian counteroffensive as everybody was speaking. And when the American aid started to wane, I mean, of course, we still have the multi-billion aid coming from US. I mean, I think it will be passed in a few weeks. Jake Sullivan also confirmed, but even then it might be the last aid, the big package coming from the US, and after that it probably is going to be up to Europe. And I have written a great deal on how it is up to Europe, and perhaps in my opinion coming back of Trump would be the kind of medicine that Europe needs to stand for its own security and fend for its own security. And this is something that a lot of Europeans would share. That yes, perhaps we need to be woken up from the slumber that we've been into for a long time. So coming back more directly to your question, I see that there is a lot of, I would say, initiatives that countries like France, Germany, UK, and Poland are taking when it comes to, defense collaboration for defense industry collaboration for Ukraine and with Ukraine. Yeah, and then you also have only today there was this news that NATO has given this $1.2 billion for for acquisition of 155 shells. So I think they are doing all of that, and the sense in India that France and Germany would not like to take a hard stance or a hawkish stance on Ukraine is not correct. I think they are very worried because the way the war is sort of continuing. So that's one. The other thing, because you mentioned strategic autonomy and ties with the US, I think the situation in the Red Sea is something that merits our attention, because if there was to be say somebody like Trump or the MAGA group coming back in the US, and if the US were to pull off, right now of course they are striking the Houthis, but if they were to pull off, because looking carefully, the sea lanes in the Red Sea, it's basically Europe and India that are more dependent on the sea lanes and not the US so much. So you could have a situation where you would have probably a country like France, a country like the UK, and perhaps India, joining some sort of a trilateral to actually tackle the Houthi menace out there. So this is something which is futuristic, but what I'm saying is that in the case of a likely Trump comeback, you might have these scenarios that didn't really exist before, and a different kind of a trilateral coming together for tackling a particular menace that really didn't exist before. So I think the world is very uncertain, it's fluid and changing, and that is why to keep one's options open is, I think, the need of the hour. And if you carefully look at how France is going about it, I think they're very, very clear on that sense of realism that I talked about, that they would have, the strategic autonomy intact in a more idealistic sense. It's like that light that really guides their foreign policy because, of the French Empire and all of that. But despite that, I think they're very clear that they need to put together the European project for their own security, and at the same time, the second leg of that is to deepen ties with the NATO. Unlike what people here would think, that France would have problems with the NATO. That was a 2017 or 2019 times. It has radically changed after Russia-Ukraine war.
You mentioned the Red Sea. Now, the US, when the whole the Houthis attack happened, and which affected the global maritime commerce, the US had formed this wanted to form this naval alliance. The French did not join the alliance. The French said that, yes, we will operate in that area, our ships will operate in that area, and we will coordinate, but they will continue to remain under the French flag. So somewhere is those tensions still remains there between those two?
Well, yes, I mean, when it comes to, I think what France wants to make everybody understand is that just because they are signatories to NATO and just because they are part of the G7 doesn't mean that they are going to be on board with every decision that the US takes. That doesn't mean, or it's not tantamount to saying that if need be, they would not do what is required to be done.
That's a good point, and that is why I say you should reach Swasti, because she brings out the nuanced approach to multiple issues. Keshav, while we talk about Macron, and I remember I was reading this, your story, by the way, that you did yesterday on the fact that while, he was ready to come to India, there were massive protests against Macron in France. So what's happening in France? Why are there protests against Macron?
Right. So the farmers' protests that began around 17th or 18th of January comes on the basis of multiple issues which you see across the European continent. In fact, it first started on the 15th of January in Germany because the farmers say that there are low food prices because of competition with wheat from Ukraine, for example, high energy costs, and overregulation from the European Union. So there's a lot of angst and worry amongst the farmers across the Netherlands, Romania, Poland, Germany, and now France. Right, this sort of rural discontent, which has led to the surge of, for example, Geert Wilders winning in the Netherlands polls earlier in 2023. And if you look at the opinion polls in France right now, Marine Le Pen, the far-right leader, her party is actually polling better than Macron's own party because of this rural discontent, right? So while Macron has arrived in India to, the usual pomp and show, successful road shows, Republic Day parade, back home, he is actually facing a crisis of the rural discontent against overregulation by his government. His government is looking at cancelling agricultural subsidies, right? So there are these issues which are pan-European, which is sort of a stumbling block for someone like Macron, who loves to say, I'm a centrist, right? I'm neither right, I'm neither left, I'm right in the center. And he's trying to deal with all of this in the midst of a new government that came to power on the 10th of January. He just replaced his prime minister. So he's dealing with multiple domestic issues in the middle of all of his travel here.
That's true, and Swasti, and this is where I would want you to weigh in. For example, you just mentioned the fact that there's a new government, in the sense, the president has changed his prime minister. So how strong is Macron within France itself? The fact that he had to reboot his own government speaks some kind of a volume about.
I'm so glad you asked me this question, because this is a question which is not understood well enough a lot of times. And see, you have to understand that the French political system is a presidential system, which is that the president is the main leader. The president is the one that takes care of foreign policy and security and defense and those matters, while the prime minister, which is of course appointed by the president, is basically in charge of domestic affairs. So you'd be surprised to know that under Macron, there have been 4 prime ministers up to now. So Gabriel Attal, who's the latest prime minister, is the 4th one to serve under Macron. The reason why the earlier Prime Minister, Elizabeth Borne, had to resign was because of this very controversial, I'm sure a lot of people may have heard about the pension reforms and the unrest that they had triggered across France, but that's still old news. What really became in many ways her nemesis, or I think it was very clear by the time that the reform was pushed, was basically this very strangely strong law on immigration. The point was that he mentioned Marine Le Pen. I think the viewers would know that there is a surge of far-right politics across Europe, because ever since the Arab Spring it's like sweeping completely, because basically the thing is that because the European Union is a left liberal project, they are ideologically, they feel obligated to let the refugees in, but the number of refugees that started to to come in Europe after 2015 was in millions, and the European Union was basically not prepared for it. And then they came, and because they could not be sort of incorporated well enough into the local population, because of ideological issues sometimes, because of ethnic issues sometimes, that has become a ticking bomb, across Europe. And I'm sure everybody keeps hearing of how the far right parties across Europe, whether it's Germany or France or Sweden or Netherlands, they're doing very well. In fact, you have a new far right leader in the Netherlands. So coming back to this, what Macron has done is that before Gabriel Attal, the prime minister who was in power, was supposed to rally support for this controversial immigration law. Now something very interesting happens, Snehesh, there. The immigration law that Macron put together was seen as very strong. It was seen as very anti-immigrant, and it kind of triggered a very sharp reaction from Macron's own party MPs. Okay, and so when this particular law was tabled, by the way, one must also know that in France, in the lower house, Macron's party does not have the majority. So what happened was that then it was the prime minister's job to basically rally support, and when that bill was tabled, Macron's own party MPs, either abstained or voted against it, while the far right MPs voted in favor of it, and that is the context to which Marine Le Pen actually said that this is an ideological victory for the far right. Now, after that, of course, Elizabeth Borne had to go, and then Gabriel Attal was brought in. The thing that I want to mention here is I think Macron has figured out that if he wants to not let the far right get away with this anti-immigration sentiment in Europe, the centrist parties across Europe have to come up with a more strong solution to the people's calls for clamping down on illegal immigration and stuff. And this immigration bill is actually a reflection of that. Now, when you say, is Macron today strong enough, etc., see, Macron is going to be president until 2027, and according to French law, he cannot run a third consecutive time. So either he comes back in 2032, which is like after this particular interregnum, or I mean, one doesn't know really what happens in 2032, but he definitely cannot contest again after 2027. What he has done, which is a smart move, is that he has brought in Gabriel Attal. Gabriel Attal was the education minister.
Exactly.
Gabriel Attal was also his spokesperson during COVID years. And Gabriel Attal is also looked as a Macron loyalist. He's very young, and he's actually been brought to counter Marine Le Pen's successor, who's also equally young, in fact younger. I think his name is Joseph Bardella. I could be getting the first name wrong. Jordan Bardella, maybe. Jordan Bardella is only 28, and Marine Le Pen has appointed him a successor. This happened last year. So Macron has brought in a young candidate, a Macron loyalist, somebody who's very good with media, very good at speaking, and he's also seen as having this, strong stance against all these identity politics, because when he was education minister, he was the guy who actually banned the abaya.
Yeah.
So Macron is
abaya in school.
Yeah, in the schools. So what I want to say, and I'll conclude with this, is that he's been trying to put a successor, in place, number one, and by then by 2027 he would have 3 years of political experience that Bardella won't have, right? So, and if you look carefully, the major task before Attal is to basically look at the middle class and all the problems of the middle class, and what he mentioned is also there. And of course, that's a challenge in France today, because it's a pan-European challenge. Honestly, there's inflation, there's a lot of things.
Yeah.
So, but he would still get the 3-year political experience. Number one. Number two. The important thing that a lot of people miss is that France is a left liberal, Macron is a left liberal, ideology, but with bringing Attal, centrist, like a centrist.
He's more of a centrist.
He's more of a centrist.
With a little bit of more on the right.
Yeah, we could say centrist with left leaning, or maybe centrist. I think centrist is the more better way of
the
acting.
economic and security front is towards the, that's the confusion which happens. Politically one might be this thing, but when it comes to economic and security issues, you tend to shift towards the
you could say the liberal democratic centrist, that kind of ideological underpinning. And by bringing Attal, he's also trying to sort of outdo the far right claim on immigration, because that's the only claim to fame that the far right now has. So I think that's a smart move, but it's a gamble, because a lot of times, a lot of people, commentators are saying that this could actually result in Macron's electorate that been voting for Macron, he could alienate them. But let's see, 3 more years to go.
Just to add to that, before he actually held a press conference on the 16th of January where he actually moved right towards socially, because he's focusing on school, where he's saying we should bring back school uniforms, which is a pet project of the right in France generally. So while he may have come in as a centrist to sort of understanding that there needs to be some reclamation to the right, you can see Macron's press conference, which is rare, by the way, in his Jupiter presidency era. He has actually come in and said, we need school uniforms. We need school, which is a repetition of his order, which he keeps talking about, right? So you can see, to combat or to claim that space, Macron has also sort of positioned himself more socially on the right in his efforts to, curb Le Pen's growing popularity in France.
Well, he, as Swasti was saying, he's a smart guy. While as we speak, I have my producer in front of me showing me that time is running out. So I'll come back to this last question, and come back to as in the whole French India thing. And this would be the last question: is how do you see these ties? As cliched as it may sound, the question, but how do you genuinely see the Indo-French ties going from here?
So, well, just to reiterate the point that I began, this discussion with, which is that it is a very unique template. You have these two, countries which come from different theaters, which one is in the European theater, one is in the Indo-Pacific theater, and with different security concerns, but still finding so much to converge on, without any, like I said, the 2+2, etc., etc. So without such clutches. So that itself speaks volumes of India-France ties. I think the one thing that I would want to sort of conclude today's discussion from my end would be that It is important to note that while we are having this, the defense industry cooperation will remain the star performer and the core foundation of India-France ties. And I think there's one thing that I would like to say is that a lot of times, and there is, you would know better. I mean, we are discussing the Rafale Marine deals, and then perhaps we are talking about the Shakti turbo shaft engine. We are doing the combat helicopter deals.
The AMCA thing is supposed to
And then we are
happen.
also perhaps the MRFA. Who knows? Because the
hopefully.
114, hopefully, and it makes sense because see, from a very purely economic perspective, it's economies to scale, right? I mean, it's like it's better returns because then you have a particular model which is designed for India, and then the maintenance and everything can be taken care of better. So you would have the
With
114
production, of course, in India.
with production in India. And then also, if we want to reach that magical 450 number for our 40 squadrons, as the air chief has also been mentioning a lot of times, I mean, how will we do it? I mean, a part of it, of course, will come from Tejas and all that. Some of it is coming from the 12 Sukhoi Mk-30, but that's just 12. So we would need the 114 too. And then I think it's better sooner, done, because if we just let it linger, then it'll take I don't know how many years. But the point that I wanted to reiterate was that it's important to know that here there seems to be some confusion a lot of times when we talk to European counterparts about the requirement of indigenization and the indigenous content, the IC. And I think what I want to reiterate, because that's the sense that I get from a lot of discussions, is that actually the requirements for IC or the indigenous content can really be decided by the Defense Acquisition Council. So no matter what the what the proposal itself says, if there is the government to government will, these things can be easily manipulated. I mean, easily changed, I would say, not manipulated, but changed. And on the French side, it is important to know that it is Macron only who is in charge of actually going forward with these deals. Like I said, that the security, defense, foreign policies, everything is under the president's ambit. So I think it is the right time to take advantage of these things and try to build and capitalize on these enabling mechanisms that we've put in place, because I think that is something that will sort of set the tone for the 2047 and the next 25 years, etc.
Absolutely. I so agree with you on this, Swasti. But thank you so much, Swasti, for coming down all the way from office. I know it at this time of the traffic and with all the Republic Day security already in place. But thank you so much for coming over and speaking to your viewers. And it was a pleasure interacting with you. And thank you so much, Keshav, too, also for bringing in your perspective to this whole issue. And viewers, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Do log on to the Print YouTube channel. Subscribe to us. We will have more such debates coming up in the next few days. But yes, as I always say, continue to read the Print, not just for me or for Keshav, but also for our excellent set of columnists. And I would again emphasize on the word young set of columnists who bring in a new and modern perspective to the international forum. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Snehesh. Thank you.